This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sirr.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show.
Romance Option by Micheál McCann for Eva Griffin. I direct my avatar in circles and rings around the desires of a bohemian mage who addresses me handsomely and hotly as thou, or I blush as a stream bleeds red at sunset, seeing your figure appearing in my chambers. I hope to impress and make myself necessary. And just for now, I am the only one who knows that I am pursuing a light man, that a world trembles uniquely mine, sealed by incantations and decisions that will be remembered later. The evening birds peep blearily in the loud hedge of forest flame, and that I play it myself in secret is no concern to them, and I return to enchanting. Praise these vessels, rafts to a peopled island.
That was Leanne Quinn reading the poem Romance Option by Micheál McCann, which is one of the two poems from which the title Romance Options, Love Poems for Today, was plucked for the title of this vibrant new anthology of love poems, which has just been published by Dedalus Press. Contributors include well-known poets such as Catherine Phil McCarthy, Patrick Deely, Jared Smith, but there's also a feast of poems by new and emerging poets, Paulina Cosgrave, Chandrika Narayan Mohan, Raphael Mendes, Kieran Fionn Murphy, just to name a few. So it very much reflects the very diverse landscape of Irish poetry today. The editors say that all of the poets have one thing in common. They all love or have loved, but I'm wondering, do they have new things to say about this perennial theme? Can love poetry still deliver a punch? So with us today are the editors of Romance Options, and we're very happy to have Leanne Quinn and Joseph Woods, both indeed friends of this podcast. Leanne featured on Books for Breakfast with her second collection, Some Lives, was published by Dedalus in 2020, and Joe Woods is also a guest on Books for Breakfast talking about his fourth collection, Monsoon Diaries, which was published by Dedalus.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant to have Joe and Leanne here. You're very welcome. Well, to start off, there have been other anthologies of Irish poetry. Peter and I were discussing it at the breakfast table before you arrived. I'm thinking of Don the Grow, Irish Love Poems, edited by Paula Redes, with an introduction by Gabriel Rosenstock. That came out in 1966. There was The Long Embrace, 20th Century Irish Love Poems. I think that was published by Faber in 1989, and it was edited by Frank Ormsby. And that collection presented the best Irish love poems of the 20th century from Yeats upwards. And then there was Ireland's Love Poems, edited by Norman Jeffries. That came out in 2000. So we're just wondering, why do we need another anthology of love poems? So Joe or Leanne, who'd like to start on that one?
I mean, I think this is, a pressing question. And when Pat Bourne approached me with the idea, it was something I had to think about myself. But really, so much has changed, in the 21st century. Like the anthologies you mentioned there, like if you look at Frank Ormsby, I mean, when that came out, homosexuality wasn't yet decriminalised, divorce was not legal in Ireland, not to mention anything of the marriage equality referendum or all the kind of changes that have happened since then. And I feel like very few of these changes had actually been anthologized. So that was kind of, there was kind of a gap there, I think, where all these changes were happening, but very few of them had been, reflected, except for recently with the kind of landmark anthology by Paul Maddern, Queering the Green, which are really important in terms of representation, in terms of diversity, in terms of representing marginalised voices. So I think this gave us like a similar kind of opportunity to follow on from that and create a really, really inclusive anthology that is reflective of our times.
Well, it definitely is that. And Joe, do you want to add to that?
And yeah, I think, as Leanne said, when Pat asked us initially, I kind of immediately reached for what were on the shelves, and the books you mentioned, among them. But I also realized is that with the Frank Ormsby, The Long Embrace, it was almost 40 years ago. That
Mm.
and you're looking at poems by and I mean he does have a number of contemporary authors, Elaine Cullinan, and our contemporary writers are there, but there was a sense that very much, I think, as Leanne said, that society, certainly in Ireland, has changed, and has changed so much, almost at a pace that we haven't really recognized ourselves, because we've lived through it. So I think it was a very good point, a kind of very good juncture to kind of take stock with an anthology.
Yeah, because you kind of explicitly address that. I mean, when you put out your open call to Irish and Ireland-based poets, and you ask them to consider the realities of our romantic, emotional, and intimate lives today, and I think, obviously, from what you're saying, the today bit is important because as you said, the reality of today is pretty different from the reality of the world in which those other earlier anthologies were published. So it must have been quite a process sifting through all those poems and then deciding kind of what to choose.
It really was. It was a kind of a staggering array, Peter, of forms and subject matter. I mean, it was really, really extraordinary. I mean, there were so many, and also formalism. There was, I think when people sometimes reach for a poem, the love poem, or reach to write one, they kind of adopt forms like, the sonnet, and there's ghazals in there, and there's so many different forms. But again, the subject matter, I think, for us was very interesting. Just every kind of version of love, even from grief to I suppose love in middle age, and love in old age, and it was a really amazing array of material that came in. Very little of it predictable, actually.
Yeah, I think as well, like, I think the danger, like, with, love poetry or love anthology, it can often, like, elicit a kind of groan or sigh, because you're kind of almost expecting the cliched. But I think what we really found is that the poems that came in, like, they really disrupted ideas of a love, like what is love, what is it to love, how do people communicate today. And I think that was really, really interesting, and that kind of diversity, as Joe said, of form, that was really represented in that as well. And I mean, I hope readers will have that sense of something very fresh and kind of new of the anthology, maybe goes against what they were initially expecting.
Well, I certainly did. And there were a few groans and sighs in there as well, Leanne, I think. But no, you're both very experienced poets. And Joe, you've done a lot of editing of anthologies. You've edited several poetry publications. You co-edited with Irene De Angelis Our Shared Japan, an anthology of contemporary Irish poetry concerning Japan, and that came with an essay by Seamus Heaney. And then with Jared Smith, you co-edited the Poetry Project, which is a web anthology, wasn't it, of visual artists and filmmakers. Then in Zimbabwe, you've had great experience. You edited a history of the Irish in Rhodesia and Zimbabwe. And I was just thinking, reading this, it must be great, the two of you, very strong, experienced poets. And then, Joe, you're bringing your editing experience to it. But also the two of you, I think, you've travelled a lot, like you have that in common. Like Joe, you've travelled in Asia and Latin America. You've lived in Japan, Yangon, Myanmar, and Leanne, you're based in Munich. So you had a lot in common. And I often think that if you're editing a book together, you need to have some sort of personal connection. And of course, the strongest personal connection between the two of you is that you were both born in Drogheda. So I'm just wondering, do these personal connections, do they help you come together? I mean, did you know each other very well before you edited the book? And it seems like you've a lot.
Well, we're determined that because we're both from Drogheda, that Drogheda is going to be the new romantic capital of Ireland. I mean, it's completely bizarre. Actually, we discovered in when we were editing, and again, so much of this was kind of done remotely, and although we did manage to meet up in Limerick, but we discovered along the way that actually I knew we knew our families knew each other, which I didn't know before the book. But I would have known Leanne, through Poetry Ireland, and when she was doing readings and through her first book. But we didn't actually know each other in Drogheda, funnily enough.
Leanne, did you find Joe very difficult to work with?
No, not at all. And as Joe says, we knew each other through family, through our parents knowing each other, and then as Joe said, I met Joe through when I did my Poetry Ireland's introductions as well. But I think we were very compatible as editors. I think we were really good at communicating, and we were kind of very open. And I think initially in the project we were reading a lot on our own, so it was solitary reading. So for the first 4 or 5 weeks, so by the time we actually met up on Zoom initially, and then we actually met in Limerick, which was great. We just had so much to talk about, and it was brilliant to be able to discuss the poems with someone else in a real kind of open and honest way. So I think communication was great on that front, and I think it really helped get a real sense of balance with the anthology as well.
Yeah, so communication and openness, all the good qualities of a good romantic relationship, isn't that right?
And that I have to say, and that in my experience of editing, I really, really prefer to co-edit, because there's a fantastic thing of somebody, there was a fantastic symmetry in terms of what we kind of immediately lit upon in terms of material and stuff, but also I was really grateful to have a kind of a co-pilot, in the sense of almost to second guess you, the way if you're looking at a poem that you thought was maybe or whatnot, because one thing in my experience is that having been away for the last 10 years, almost 10 years from Ireland, is that you almost kind of miss out on a generation. There's almost a new generation of writers and of poets. So it was really valuable to have a kind of, a second person like Leanne, a second editor, to have to bounce off. I think it's the best way to edit a book, to be honest with you, in terms of poetry.
Well, that's really positive. Now, dare I mention a UK poet, given that this Romance Options is an anthology of Irish poets, but I would like to mention John Burnside, who said, "There are almost as many definitions of love as there are poets, because most poets have something to say about it." So I think, do the two of you think that this is the case in this anthology?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a multiplicity of voices there. And what we didn't want is we didn't want the poems to seem like they were repeating the same idea or the same theme. So we were looking for themes within the theme of love, all love in all its facets, new love, but also love that has endured, and the complications that are involved with that, and as well, I think something that was striking was the difficulty of finding love in the 21st century, because of the ways we interact have changed so much. I think that's something that kind of came up again and again, a grief as Joe mentioned before, but I think there's so many sides to it, and I think that there's no sense of things repeating themselves in the anthology, and I think we were kind of keen that wouldn't be the case, so you do get love in kind of all its colour,
which is really good. There's a great variety to it. Well, to give the listeners some taste of the poetry on offer, here's Catherine Ann Cullen. She's reading her poem Subsidence. And just to say, Catherine Ann has been Poetry Ireland's inaugural poet in residence. Her books include The Other Now, published by Dedalus in 2016, and a new book for children is just out, The Song of Bridget's Cloak, published by Beehive Press in 2022, and she's just taken up the role of postdoctoral fellow at School of English Drama and Film at UCD under the Irish Research Council's Enterprise Partnership Scheme with the support of Poetry Ireland. So well done, Catherine Ann. And here she is reading her poem Subsidence.
Love isn't always straightforward, and this sonnet is about the struggle of loving someone who's experiencing depression and despair. It's dedicated to all the partners out there who are affected by this darkness. I hope they can find some light. Subsidence. I did not know the weight of a heart could sink a house, but where the front door stood, only the lintel looms above ground now. Today I squeezed onto the landing floor, climbed down to where you slump in the cellar. But we had no cellar. Here at the countertops we drank the sun for years, with coloured straws bent to savour the last drops. Soon I'll take the children to the attic to breathe some light. There the sun will set in the window and the houses opposite reflect the morning. When the rays get to your heart, my love, they're bound to shift it. I'd carry you up myself if I could lift it.
And as a follow-on to Catherine Ann's poem, let's hear Mark Granier read his poem called Crown Shyness. Mark lives in Bray. His fifth collection, Ghostlight New and Selected Poems, was published by Salmon. So let's have a listen to him now.
I was doing a bit of online research for a sequence of short essays and poems about trees called Notes on Woods. I came across this wonderful term, crown shyness, that applies to certain trees that avoid damaging each other's crowns or catching various kinds of tree-borne infections by growing in such a way as to leave spaces between their own topmost branches and those of adjacent trees. The poem didn't begin as a villanelle. I don't usually work in such confining forms, but by the second draft that pattern of repeated phrases and images suggested itself, so I went along with it. Talking about an even more restrictive form, the sestina, Paul Muldoon likened it to stepping into the dark, because the very strictness of the pattern pushes you in directions you mightn't otherwise have considered exploring. So a poem about trees became, to some extent, a poem about marriage. There is a short, beautifully simple description on Wikipedia which I use as an introduction. Crown shyness, a phenomenon observed in some tree species in which the crowns of fully stalked trees do not touch each other, forming channel-like gaps. Wikipedia. If you want to see the pattern that they've made, you need to look up from the forest floor in summer. Ends of branches don't abrade each other, but leave ripples in their shade, as if they've grown wary of that war that moves inside the pattern that they've made. Mapping the movements of the winds that flayed and thrashed their heads till they became heart-sore, they made room for whatever might abrade. It took time. Now the channels are inlaid, and every shivering tip has taken score, moving in time with the pattern that they've made. Seams in the brainy dark, a bright cascade, a shyness almost human at its core, a canopy of gaps that can't abrade. No matter how many arguments have swayed the trees, the wood, the gap between the door and frame describes the pattern we have made, that only stillness and silence will abrade.
And that was lovely to hear both Catherine Ann Cullen and Mark Granier read their love poems from Romance Options, Love Poems for Today, a new anthology of love poems from Dedalus Press, which we are here discussing with the editors Leanne Quinn and Joseph Wood. So there's such a wide range to the poems here. First love is remembered in Emily Cullen's poem Your Old Letters, when she says, all these years later, when we've both moved on with our spouses and children, you're still in the gristle of my heart. Oh, I really enjoyed those lines. And then there's the love that's endured for years, like the marriage love of Paddy Bush's wedding anniversary. Or I liked this poem, Love in the Time of ABBA by Eileen Casey. Thought that was a great one. Love is different now, she says. We rise early on Sundays, vegetables and roast prepared the night before, pinned to the fridge, emergency phone numbers, grandchildren's rosy drawings, framed under glass, glory days of youth brighten our twilight years. We still listen to ABBA. I do, I do, I do, I do. So I really like the way the anthology, as Leanne was talking about earlier, it isn't structured according to themes of romance or love. But I think because you've alphabetically placed the poems, each poem comes in almost as a surprise, doesn't it, Jo and Leanne? And it's lovely to find the connections happening naturally between them. And did those, it really must have pleased you both, I think, those kind of playful connections that were happening quite naturally, I think.
I think it's like fascinating when those, connections become apparent. And I suppose it's when you bring any collection of poems together, like whether it's your own poems or whether it's disparate poems, when they're put together like this, they start to, almost speak to each other and speak against each other. And yeah, that was absolutely fascinating and really exciting, I think, to discover as well. And that's how we got the title for the collection with the two poems, romance option, and to discover that, within the submissions, to have these two particular poems really reaching out and speaking to each other was, it was brilliant.
Yeah, there's lots of little detonations going on in there, and I mean it's kind of interesting. And I mean, in one or two cases, I kind of, as it happens, I kind of know one or two backstories in a few of the poems, and which I'm not going to reveal here, but it's kind of. You have it's kind of strange symmetry which happens sometimes with poems are put together, and that's why I think it although it's alphabetical, it still has this weird kind of frisson, which is probably a good word to use in a romance anthology, but it has this kind of certain poems have kind of just various kind of riffs against the other poems. It's interesting, the poem there, Graham Allen, lovely. It opens the book. It's a beautiful poem, and I just thought it's just, he was just alphabetically lucky, but it was also fortunate that it's a lovely poem to kind of kick off the collection. I was also very pleased that we got, in one poem, we got garlic, cheese, and chips, which is, I think it's kind of a necessary component of courtship in Ireland. So I was delighted to see that in there as well.
Well, I think it's time for more poems now. First off, let's listen to Kelly Michaels. Kelly was born in Chicago and lives in Dublin. Her pamphlet, Disquiet, was published in 2015. And here she is reading her poem, Litany of the Human Heart.
My name is Kelly Michaels, and I wrote this poem when someone very close to me was having heart surgery. And a very good friend of mine who works in cardiac surgery told me, trying to alleviate my fears, that there is no other organ in the human body that we know more about. And I went home and I thought about that, and I thought about what we do and do not know about the human heart. And I wrote this poem. It's called Litany of the Human Heart. This is the heart that can kill us or let us live according to its whims. The heart that knows the word for abandonment in 6,909 different languages, can recite the etymology for the word hunger, turn the 5 stages of grief into 7, while turning every face of heaven toward it like a small sun. It's the broken heart, inventing its own vocabulary from a sleepless night. the heart that makes an anagram for every empty gesture, finds a plastic bag in the street to be a sign, the twisted branch of a tree, an omen, the sting of a paper cut, a prophecy. The moon-struck, red-eyed pendulum of a heart, the heart that tells you to let go, move on, to go on ahead without it, that it will catch up eventually, but never does. It's a compulsive hoarder of a heart, holding on to everything, like the pajamas of a firstborn still laced with the scent of cornstarch, the sound of a loved one breathing when asleep, a card someone sent for no reason, if only to say, "You are not forgotten," and all the other small, veiled prayers flickering like fireflies under the cupped fingers of night.
It's lovely to hear the poets read, isn't it, Peter? And thanks so much to all the poets for recording their poems. And let's have a listen now to Mark Roper. I always love his poetry, and it was great to see him included in the anthology. And actually, just to say, his latest collection, Beyond Stillness, has just been published by Dedalus. And his poem in this beautiful anthology, Romance Options, Love Poems for Today, is called Usage. And here he is reading it.
I've always loved things that have grown old being well used. The handle of a spade, for example, where the wood has developed a deep lustre from an owner's palm. So this is a poem about the delight of being allowed to grow old with someone you've loved for the best part of your life. It's called Usage. Too delicate to open my father's Bible, the much dented metal of a thermos, prayer flags, colours whitening, cotton gently weathering away, patches of gold our palms have worn on a banister's dark brown rail, the small roofless church in a field, a grey mare, the vault beside it a foal, clean bright edge of a spade, the shine where it first enters earth. In a cathedral, left on a post until it turns to air, a cardinal's biretta. Love, your hand in mine, all these years, the use the world has made of us.
So just listening to Mark Roper there, Leanne and Joe, they're beautiful last lines, aren't they, in that poem? Love, your hand in mine, all these years, the use the world has made of us. And it made me think that the right love poem is strangely reassuring. I mean, I'm talking to you as editors, but I'm the reader of this anthology, and so is Peter. And I found them in places very reassuring. You feel as if somebody else has felt like us. They've actually survived to write about these things. And suddenly we make the love poem our own. And I think some of the finest and moving of love poems are poems that speak to us about our personal experiences. And did you kind of get that visceral shock as well when you read some of these poems for the first time?
Yeah, for me, absolutely. Like, I think what makes a good love poem, just what you've touched on there, and what makes, a really good poem in general, is when, a very private or intimate moment is moved like that into the public space, and it transcends the poet and it transcends the emotion of the poet, and then it becomes the reader's, and you read the poem and you're like, oh, that's my love poem. That's I felt that, and I think we really we wanted that sense, and we hope we've kind of achieved it. And I think that's why having such a diversity and range of voices was so important as well. For getting beyond the poets themselves and reaching that wide readership.
I was going to agree, but I think there definitely were moments like that where certain poems just were like a punch, where you just suddenly, like that last line that you read from Mark Roper. You just get a kind of something. You just sharp intake of breath, sort of thing. And there were many of those, but also I think in some ways you can kind of think the idea of a love anthology is twee, but then at the same time, poetry is rolled out on those occasions. The way that it's kind of, I used to say, it's kind of births, marriages, and deaths, and the way it's a good poet should be able to write a good love poem. And I suppose this kind of assures us that there are many good poets out there. I would also like to say that uh, there were also many, many good poems that just came so close to the mark that, but just, didn't quite fit the kind of mix that we kind of, that evolved as we were reading through the submissions. There were some very, very fine poems, but just didn't quite fit the themes, in a sense.
And I think it's time for a couple more voices now. The first one we're going to hear is Martina Dalton, who is a Waterford poet, whose poems have appeared in journals like The Singing Fly, also the Irish Times, other journals and anthologies. She lives in Tramore, and here she is reading her poem, Because Her Wedding Had to Be Postponed.
Because her wedding had to be postponed. What I think of now is how, on that morning, underneath the cherry blossom tree you planted as a child, a blackbird gathered bits of moss her mate had plucked and left to dry. Confetti drops of petals that were strewn, she brought them to her nest. And the photo that you posted online of the little branch that he had walked for miles to find. How you'd placed it in the jug you'd brought back from Japan, and the simple cloth you lay it on. Above the both of you, the firmament without a single aeroplane, bringing newlyweds away or coming in. The blue and empty sky, unscarred.
And here is Sean Lycett. Sean has published several collections with Gallery Press, and most recently New Leaf was just published this year. I really liked his recent poem A Raven in the Irish Times from that collection recently. And here he is reading his poem Epigram.
Epigram, after Goethe. They say that an epigram is too short to say something of the heart. But isn't a kiss even shorter?
And we have two more poems. The first is Gift of the Magi by Grace Valence. Grace was born in New York City and lives in Dublin. She's the author of The Limit of Light, which was published by the Gallery Press in 2020.
My partner is Brazilian, and I wrote this little love poem last December when we were together at his home place in Sao Paulo, in the neighbourhood of Brasilândia. The poem is called Gift of the Magi. Waking with the tip of my nose so close to a soft neck, with its delicate ridge of spine, an ellipsis, a dotted line. Carefully I crawl over and out of bed, step to the bathroom where I meet my blanket-creased face and feel the heaviness of last night's sleep. And another sensation too, like I have lived 1,000 lives, and on this turn somehow forged something beautiful out of a lot of bad luck. It's my turn to make coffee, toast bread, and melt cheese. I open the window to get a read on the day, lean into the air. It's almost Christmas, but being from the north you mightn't know it, by the downpours and the heat already rising from the concrete. But tonight, between late evening and dusk, call it crepusculo, lights will come on, pink and green lining the windows of the high-rises at the favela's outskirts. At that hour I'll find myself here, as we make dinner side by side, a song quietly playing in the background, chopping beside steaming pots of rice and beans and sharing a cool beer, pulling spinach leaves from the stalk, discerning fresh from wilted and patiently waiting for the bay leaf's slow, certain yield.
And we'd like to sneak in one more by Philip Davison. Philip is mostly known as a novelist and playwright. He's published 9 novels, and he also writes radio drama, but it's nice to see him writing poetry. It's kind of, sometimes we erect walls around our arts, and then we say, okay, he's a novelist and you're not allowed to write poems, or he's a poet, you're not allowed to write novels. So it's nice to see those kind of barriers smashed occasionally. So here he is reading his poem, Bowl of Fruit.
Bowl of fruit. The suspended coal burst of a kiwi fruit. I have never seen you eat a kiwi. Where are you now, my brother, in your coma? I am not a ventriloquist. I will not tread softly to your bedside. I will organize no gathering. Aren't you worried about me? The birds are singing. In all humanity, there is no mistake here. This way, my daughter, not yet born, will paint your nails. I will peel an apple for you from your lousy, still life. Listen to me. The hearing I know is last to go.
And to get back to Joe and Leanne, I mean, because I often think the best love poems are often short. I mean, they can kind of pierce your hearts with their powerful brevity. Brevity being the soul of wit, and maybe also the soul of love. I mean, I think of a poem like "She Tells Her Love While Half Asleep" by Robert Graves. She tells her love while half asleep in the dark hours, with half words whispered low, as the earth turns in her winter sleep and puts out grass and flowers despite the snow, despite the falling snow. But it's lovely to see short poems in this collection too. I mean, like Andacoil Green's Anniversary, or Dara Burns, and What of Love, a 2-lined pithy poem that goes like this: and what of love, that vast and splendid thing that eats her young while teaching them to sing. It's a great decision, I think, made by both of you to include short poems like that.
Love that poem. When I read it, I got a jolt. Yeah, it's very good. So, Joe, would you like to say anything about the brevity, the power of brevity in short love poems?
Well, absolutely. Like we actually had this discussion along the way. Leanne was saying she was a great fan of short poems, and as I am too, although they don't always come out that way, unfortunately. But I completely. I think it's a great vehicle. The kind of pithy love poem, and we have a few here, yeah, as a few like couplets, and I suppose ghazals or.
Yeah, exactly. Well, listen, it's been great talking to the two of you. We're coming to the end of actually our first podcast of the season, and it's great to have Leanne Quinn and Joseph Woods here, both editors of Romance Options, Love Poems for Today. I think in such a world of great political and environmental upheaval, it's absolutely wonderful to read a book that's unequivocally in defence of love. So thank you, Joe and Leanne, for that.
Yeah, thank you, editors Joe Woods and Leanne Quinn, for coming into the breakfast table today to talk about the new anthology, Romance Options, Love Poems for Today, published by Dedalus Press. And to finish, Joe Woods is going to lead us out with a reading of Romance Option by Eva Griffin, the second poem from which the title of the anthology was taken.
This is Romance Option by Eva Griffin and dedicated to Micheál McCann. How else would he know my intentions, if not for the cursor blinking over, yes, God, yes, in some biblically horny way only the unreal can provoke? My eyes on the screen, this life of fox fur and stolen gold, the delay as the words fall from his mouth, the slight blur at the corner of you and save a dance for me. No matter, I relent. What good is love without some metric for approval? Easier to sit here and stalk an ending, line by line. I talk and he has nothing new to say, despite the camp sitting rich with spoils from the hinterlands. Another quest, him silent, Each day I return, ask, was there something you needed? He glitches right to the lonely core of me, not at present.
So that was great to hear Leanne Quinn and Joseph Woods talking about romance options, love poems for today. It was good to hear all those love poems, wasn't it, Peter?
It was, but actually, I think we might be forgetting something, because I think you also end up have a poem in this.
Peter,
isn't that right?
no,
I think
you're catching me out here now.
You're kind of getting out of reading it, but maybe we could end by hearing that poem.
Well, I was actually hoping that I'd get away with not having to read my poem, but yeah, you have reminded me, because I'm W, I always end up at the end of anthologies. So my poem is the last poem in this anthology, and it's called Great Big Bed. And it comes with a quote from Beatrice, Countess of Dia. I've always been jealous of her name. I wish I had a name like that. She was a troubadour poet, and she wrote in 1175. I know you're a big fan of the troubadour poets too, Peter. And this comes with a quote from Beatrice, who said, "For one night only, naked in your arms." So this is my poem called Great Big Bed. This great big bed makes me think of you. Not that I've ever lain a full long night with you before, but if I could, it would be here, would be now, in this great big bed, the skylight overhead. Slant of hail, a blind of snow, the whole world fierce outside, and us within, breathless in a storm of sheets. The high triple mattress, a royal test of love, our skin bruised by the pea of desire. But look, a small crack in the glass, where weather is spurting in. Oh, cruel observer of what we're about. Sleet to freeze our eyelids, wind's bitter slicing of our cheeks. And then, so slowly, how a single flake of snow can drop into your mouth and melt upon your tongue that is busy in its own way, melting over mine.